I am so excited to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. He has inspired me since I moved to this region 12 years ago. Timothy Fitzgerald Young is the founder, president, and chef of Food for Thought. How many of you have eaten some of those delicious preserves or wild leeks yeah. This is an organic and wild harvested gourmet specialty foods company. He is definitely a Bioneer. That is why we recognized him as a Bioneer of the Year this year, which goes to an individual who goes beyond duty and is called to a sense of honor and full lifeness into the Bioneer spirit of mending the bridge between biology, ecology, and social justice. And this is a man who definitely embodies that bridge. Not only is he a business entrepreneur, he's also an advocate and an activist. He was a founding board member of the Domestic Fair Trade Association. He's currently on the Northwestern Michigan Community College Foundation and is a big influential mentor leader for the nonprofit associated with Higher Grounds Trading Company called On the Ground. So I would love for you to help me give a warm welcome to Tim Young.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarna. So, tag you're it. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I've been thinking about this. Bioneers is so well organized that they asked me to do this 6 months ago. So they've given me a lot of time to think about this, deal with some angst, perfect my skills at procrastination. And so here I am. I'm still pondering what this means. And I know it's going to mean something different to everybody. But what I'm going to talk about today is what it means to me and what it means to be it. You know, who's it? Who gets to be it? Who gets to tag? What does it mean to tag? And if you're it, you know, what are the responsibilities that come with that? And how do you know when you're it? You know, all these questions have been going through my mind. The best thing I could come up with for me was to share some stories about what I'm going to call it moments, and what I think were kind of like it moments in my life, in hopes that they kind of maybe inspire you to think a little bit about your life and kind of go through your Rolodex of experiences and go, oh yeah, that was an it moment. And the way I define it moments are those experiences that carry with you for life. While 95% of our experiences or more evaporate from our biological hard drive. We don't remember 90% of what we do in life, but there are those experiences that stick with you and they come back later in life. And later in life, they have different meanings sometimes, and you get more from them. And so those are what I'm going to roughly define as it moments. Before I start on that, though, I want to just let everybody know that there's some pins that were being passed around. There's some laying around. There's some out on the table. If you have one, grab it or grab it when you leave. Because I'm hoping that when you leave today, that pin is going to have some meaning. Think of it as an empty hard drive, and through the course of this few minutes we'll be together, you can fill it with data. And not anything that I'm going to say, but hopefully it'll fill with some of your own data and some of your own memories, so that down the road, if you see that, it might remind you of some of your own moments and experiences and bring new value to them. So the first quick story I'm going to tell you, Derek talked about our ancestors, which I think is really critical. First one is about my grandmother. This woman inspired me in ways beyond imagination. Grew up on a farm in the Keynote Peninsula on the shores of Lake Superior. And this was a formative time in my life. I was a young teenager, and of course I had just figured out how the world worked. I got it. I know how the world works now. I know everything I need to know. Now I can go evangelize the world, right? So I'm sitting down with my grandmother at her dining room table, and I can't remember if I'd read Francis Moore Lappé or something, but I had decided overnight I was going to become a vegetarian, and that was the only way anybody should live. And I sat there with my grandma for like 20 minutes, just on my soapbox, telling her the evils of meat, and you know, I can't, you know, again, I don't remember all the things that I said, but I remember the moment, and I went on and on and on, and my grandma was very patient, and I don't know if I ran out of things to say or ran out of breath, but at some point I paused. And my grandma sat silent for a moment, just let that silence, settle there in her dining room. And then she just said, she goes, Timothy, you know what? She said, I don't know a whole lot about what you're talking about. She said, so I believe what you're saying. She said, but sometimes I think it's not so much what you eat as what's eating you. What could I say? I'm working from anger. I'm sure I was arrogant and condescending and all those things that, I'm sure I was and maybe still am. We're all working on that stuff. But, she taught me so much in that moment. And I didn't necessarily get it all in that moment. I was deer in the headlights there for a while. That was the end of conversation. I'm like, God, she's not going to engage me. What's going on here? I want an argument, And so that was an it moment for me because that came back to me later in life so many times. I didn't gather all the value at the moment, but as I've gone through life and been active in my community and been very passionate about certain things in my life that I commit myself to, you engage with people who don't share your values. And I've learned, obviously, that you never win an argument. You don't win debates. You can't open anybody's mind to your way of thinking if you're condescending or if you're insulting or if you're working from a place of anger. My grandmother said so much about that in those few words. And so again, that's one of those things that's carried with me and it's been these ripple effects throughout my life. I think the other thing that it taught me that I realized later in life too, that when I'm engaging with somebody and we have different values on an issue, I also realized at that moment that not only did I shut her down and didn't convince her of anything, I'd also shut down the possibility that she might have had something to give me. She could have been tagging me in other ways, but I totally shut a lot of that down too. So I give that one to my grandmother. The next opportunity I'd like to share is our story is I was fortunate to have built my own home, and I'd like to say I was being really green about it. I was just some poor kid fresh out of grad school and didn't have any money, so I started collecting materials, and next thing I know, somebody asked me to tear down a barn, and I'm building up materials, and I'm building this house. And as I was tearing a building down, the gentleman that owned it, I asked him about it, and he happened to tell me that, oh, well, I built this building in the 60s, and I actually tore down the Cedar Pickle Factory in Cedar, Michigan that was built in the 1800s to build this building. And I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. Now this is like third generation lumber. My house was made out of an old pickle factory, so I thought that was kind of cool. So some months later, I replied to an ad in the paper to tear this barn down just south of Traverse City, and I meet the owner of this barn, and I ask him, I say, hey, what's the story on this barn? What can you tell me about it? Because I'm thinking, hey, there's got to be stories with buildings, right? And he's like, I really have no idea, but there's this old guy down the road who's lived here forever, and he'll probably know. So I get in my car, go down the road, and I pull into this driveway. So picture this. I pull in this driveway, this tiny little modest house, and here in the front yard is this really old guy. Of course, I was in my 20s. I think everybody my age and older looked really old then. But he's out in his front yard. He's got this big pile of 6- and 8-foot logs and this big pile of like nicely cut firewood. And he's sitting in the middle of them with a sawhorse, cutting his winter's firewood with a handsaw. And I'm like, ooh, I'm going to like this guy. And I pull in. I kind of introduce myself, and I say, hey, I kind of like your method of cutting wood here. And he says, yeah, I'm 101 years old, and I've been doing it that way my whole life. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I'm like, okay, well, and I start to explain to him. I said, I'm tearing this house or this barn down the road down. The owner, asked me to come do this, and I'm just kind of wondering if, and I stop, and his eyes are welling up, and there's a tear rolling down his cheek. And I'm like, never, ever in my life have I wanted to reverse time and start over again and reintroduce myself and say something completely different, right? So I'm in a panic here. And he says, it's okay, tell me what you're doing. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of like, where do I go from here? And I explain to him that I'm tearing this barn down and I'm going to build my house and everything. And he starts to, sort of regain some composure. And then he says, well, that's great. He says, let me tell you about this barn. He said, and first of all, I'm glad that you're going to do that. He said, because I've been very distraught for years because people have been not taking care of this barn. And I'm pretty sure the snow this winter was going to collapse that barn and there would be nothing left for you to recover. And he said, and I do have some stories. He said, that barn was built in, I forget the years, I think 1912. And he said, as we did back then, all my neighbors, we all got together, and we all worked in this barn for our neighbors. And at the end of the barn raising, we had a traditional barn dance. And he said, it was at that dance, I was 15 years old, that I met a young woman who 6 months later became my wife. now the tears are rolling down my face, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing here, you know? And it was wonderful. So man, he tagged me. That was the it moment, right? I mean, I'm sitting here with this huge, valuable story about this barn that's going to go into making my house, and I'm like, wow. You know, what did he teach me? He taught me many things. Again, you know, the ripple effects of that experience in my wake and in the wake of his life has continued to give me these like social compound interests for the rest of my, and it will for the rest of my life. It was an amazing moment, and the one thing that stands out the most is he instilled in me just the importance of story and sharing stories. I mean, you know, my children have heard these stories ad nauseum. They probably want to tear my house down by now, but you know, it was so important to me, and it made me rethink about, wow, the Cedar Pickle Factory, now I got this great story. I went home and started keeping a log of my house construction because I didn't do it alone. I had friends and family, and everybody would come on weekends and help build this house, and all the stories of the material that went into it, I wrote them down, and I put them in Ziploc bags, and I stuffed them in the wall cavities of my house. I call them it bombs, you know? So when my kids do tear down that little shack in the woods, they're going to find these things, and that building is going to have new meaning, I hope someday. So that was a wonderful it moment. That's really not him, but I just... I actually took that of an old man in Havana, Cuba, because I thought he looked like Hemingway. I thought, he's not dead. He's hiding out in Havana, you know. This is I guess a tough one. It was for me anyway. I was working in Nicaragua in the 80s, and I was working on a construction site to build a safe house for women who had been rendered destitute from the war. And before building the project, I hadn't met any of the women who would benefit from this. I was working with the Friends Service Committee and that was funding the project. And so there was a Red Cross person there. I was talking to them about it. They said, well, we know we're working with some of the women now, and let me introduce you to some. So they set this meeting up with these two women. And so what these women, they had two very powerful things in common. Both of them had lost their husbands and all their male sons to the war that was going on at that time. And tell you what, I couldn't even talk to them. I couldn't even ask them questions. It was amazing. Fortunately, there were some other people in the room that were engaging them and talking to them. But, you know, the power that these women inspired in me, the fact that they just got up every day and put clothes on inspired me. They became my heroes. They were still, you know, doing what they had to do to survive. They were, you know, getting up every day. They were trying to, you know, make it in this world because, as many of you would understand, in this culture, a woman without a male to bring in some monetary income is going to be in a pretty desperate situation. And some of them had daughters that they were, you know, still, and granddaughters that they were trying to, you know, raise and take care of. But I tell you what, the it moment for me here and the ripple effect that carries with me through life is that, you know, I can't ever feel sorry for myself ever again. I just can't, because I can think of this and think, wow. You know, and the other thing they taught me is really the deep sort of, you know, we've all had these moments, but just, you know, we're Bioneers, you know, we get it. War is just not a good thing. But it just also reinforced in me about how governments and media and everybody just talks about, it's like a scorecard, you know, 3 terrorists killed today, one of our guys. It's like all these just like, you know, you could put it up on a scoreboard in the gymnasium, and that's how we, you know, many of us or many of our people that feed us information look at war. But the invisible costs of war, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, you know, of what happens when we have these wars. Next one, I probably went a little too quick here, but the next experience I want to share with you was, many of you here who are local, of course, will know a gentleman named Chris Treater. Yes, let's hear it for Chris, right? So Chris has an organic and fair trade coffee company here in town. And he and I were in Chiapas one time together, and we were just doing a little bit of research. He was representing his buyers cooperative at the time and meeting with the growers cooperative in Chiapas to just kind of check and see how the next year's crop was coming along, negotiate the price, kind of check in and see how things were going, and basically represent all of Chris's little cooperative of buyers here in the U.S. And he was in this little, you know, typical kind of grass or dirt floor, tin roof, you know, little building they had outside of their warehouse, talking to these farmers. And I was kind of a fly in the wall, just sort of listening and just sort of actually, I put that up there because I was mostly watching my daughter outside playing with some local kids and not really paying a real close attention to what was going on. And then suddenly, Chris said something that caught my attention, and it was like, oh, wait a minute. And I started paying attention, and he was talking to the farmers. And they were saying that, well, last year we didn't really make any money, but the price you paid us was fair. You know, no need to change the price. It was just a kind of a tough year. And Chris was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, our truck broke down, the new engine cost us $5,000, and that pretty much wiped out all the, you know, the shares that we were going to give to our growers. But they all got paid the base price, so we did okay. And Chris was like, you know, without even thinking, he was just like, no, that's not a good year, you know. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have to pay you 15 cents more a pound this year based on your projected yield so that you can recoup that $5,000 and give that out to your farmers. And he said, and then we're going to do something else. He says, I think from now on, I'm going to propose this to my cooperative. He says, I think I'm going to propose that we add another 10 or 15 cents every year on top of the agreed upon price that you can put into sort of a capital improvement fund or use it for you know, building a medical clinic in your community or some kind of a social benefit that helps you guys be more sustainable. And I was like, whoa, you know. I had been involved in fair trade and, you know, and was a complete advocate, but I'd never had an opportunity to kind of see it work in action. You know, here was a guy putting community interest and the interests of the people he was in business with on an equal level. You know, hey, you know, this has got to work for both of us, and this is, you know, what I'm going to propose that we do. Up until that moment, I'd given public talks about fair trade. I'd been an evangelist about fair trade, but I'd never had that story or that moment. You know, if you'd asked me what fair trade was prior to that moment, I would have probably said, oh, it's the, you know, social justice alternative to global trade, and, you know, it would have been something that would have probably made your eyes roll or put you to sleep or something. But Chris gave me this beautiful story that from that point on I could share. And the wonderful thing about this, too, is I think when these it moments happen, we don't remember them. The person who's doing the tagging doesn't remember them, because they're not, in their world, doing anything out of the ordinary. That's just how Chris rolls. It's what he does. It's how my grandma rolled, you know? I mean, she gave me so many, you know, it moments in her life. It was, you know, just the way these people work. And the other thing that, about these it moments for me is, here I am, a teenager again, right? So, I am going back to my teenage years, and I think prior to some of these moments that I've already shared with you, I never saw myself as anything but a recipient of it moments. I never saw myself as any kind of a leader or anybody who could in any way inspire somebody else. You know, it just didn't ever occur to me. I just saw myself as this really lucky recipient of all the wisdom of my mentors and my teachers and my ancestors. And many of you in this room have been mentors and inspirational to me, and I thought, wow, what a lucky guy I am, but I never saw myself in that opposite position. Until about somewhere around this time of my life, it was sort of the dawning of Facebook technology, or the Facebook application, or whatever we call those things, and I was playing around, you know, kind of thinking, hey, this is really cool, and finding old high school friends, as I think a lot of us have done, and I'm on this little group of some old high school buddies, and I get this friend request from this woman, and in the memo she says, I don't know if you remember me, but, you know, I knew you back then, and, you know, so friended her and didn't think anything of it because I didn't remember her. And then a few moments later, I get this really long message. I don't think I've ever had a Facebook message that long since then. And she proceeded to tell me of a moment that she had when we were teenagers. She was a couple years younger than me, so she described a moment when she was 14, and she was hanging out with a bunch of my buddies and I, and we were all, you know, a couple years older. She thought we were really cool and wanted to hang out with us, and I guess my friends, as she describes it, were putting a lot of pressure on her to, like, if you want to be and hanging out with us, you got to go smoke pot, we're going to go to this party tonight, you know, you got to, like, roll with us here. And she was not comfortable with that. And again, I don't remember any of this, but she tells me, yeah, I don't remember a lot about that era. Okay. So she tells me that I followed her outside, and I just said very few words to her. I said, you know what? You don't have to do this. If you're not comfortable with it, don't do it. And I walked away. Again, I don't remember it, and I don't remember her, which is, I feel bad, but in any event, she went on to say that this was a very empowering moment in her life, and that she said literally these words. It made her a more powerful woman. It gave her the confidence to say no, and she said, and it had this ongoing impact in my life. She said, now I'm a middle school teacher, and she said that experience comes to me on a daily basis. I see children struggling with these issues, and I'm in a better position to encourage them and mentor them to get through these moments in life. And, you know, I'm reading this and thinking, I could have just as easily been the kid given her the peer pressure to, do some, make some poor decision. I don't think I was an exceptional kid. That was just a moment that I did something that, felt like the right thing to do. And so it's really helped me to be able to really see what, that I can be that person too. And that we all can. I mean, that's really where I'm going here, is that I've been sitting around, maybe enjoying getting tagged, but never really envisioned myself as being someone who tags somebody. And now I realize I don't have to, none of us, we don't have to like solve world hunger or end war to be an inspirational person or to be a mentor or to tag somebody. And that all of us throughout our lives have been creating it moments and leaving them in our wake, and we forget them. We're not even aware we did them. Whether you just help some neighborhood kid put the chain back on his bike, or who knows what it can be, but you can inspire people. And we do, and all of you do. So what I'm going to leave you with is just that. You are already it. You can tag, you can be it, but you're already it, and you've always been it. And I think all I'm really doing is rephrasing what Alice Walker said, is that we are the people that we've been waiting for. Thank you.
We are ho hey, we are hey ya ho hey, we ya ya hey ya. We are ho hey, we are hey ya ho, we ya ya hey ya. We are ho hey, we are hey ya ho, we ya ya hey ya. We are ho hey, we are hey.